Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill. A lot of people talking about that Texas Ohio State game that we just saw. Two of the best teams in the country just going to battle. Not enough people are talking about what this Texas team is going to look like in 2025. And it's early to start talking about what this depth chart's going to look like in 2025. But as I take a quick peek under that hood, I don't think it's crazy to say this team gets better going into 2025. And look, this Texas Longhorns football team in 2024 was certainly capable of winning a national championship. And if you're a Texas Longhorns fan, the one thing you're just so fired up about is you have a coach that, as long as Coach Sark is running this program, you're going to be competing for national championships every single year. I want to have two different conversations. One, let's talk about where this Texas Longhorns program is going, kind of a state of the union take on it, and then take an early look at what this 2025 team is going to be. Now, before we get into it, as always, one to the Texas Longhorn fans, it's been really fun talking about this football team all of 2024. A lot of y'all showing a ton of support to the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, look, I know it's early. I took my stab at taking a look at what this 2025 team is going to look like. I'm sure many Texas fans maybe see this depth chart shaking out a little bit differently. Would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. That's probably my most exciting reason to be doing this episode, to hear from y'all. So appreciate you guys rocking with it. Let it fly in the comment section. Dill, before we get into what this team's going to look like in 2025, I'll give you the tee box in terms of where's this Texas Longhorns program at and where they going.
Yeah, I think Sark's got this role. Like, he's taking advantage of being the head coach at Texas. And it felt like really since the Mac Brown days, you didn't have coaches taking advantage of that. You didn't have coaches who were like building a fundamental culture of like tough, rugged teams, along with being able to have a ton of talent on the outside and every other spot where you need it. And I look like, again, there's a lot of different ways to build football teams at this point in college football. You can do it the Dabo Sweeney way, where you kind of shun the transfer portal model. You can do it the Ole Miss way, where you kind of shun high school recruiting and you just add a ton of kids in the portal each year. I think you look at where Sark's kind of building these teams, like his offensive lines, they come from high school recruited classes. They play together for a long time, and you see really, really strong play from those units, but also being able to supplement with like really high level players.
Yeah,
like
we
being able
talk
to
about
add an
this.
Andrew Makuba in the offseason fundamentally changed that Texas secondary to an extent.
The recipe to me is perfect in terms of how Coach Sark's going about building this roster. Like, yeah, it's the bulk of this team is going to be recruited out of the high school ranks. Keep in mind, they just signed the number one class in 2025. And then we're just going to fill in the cracks or, kind of put the cherry on top in the transfer portal. Texas doesn't need to go out and get 20 plus guys because they ain't 20 plus guys in the transfer portal that can come be impact guys for Texas. That's just what they do on the recruiting trail. But like you said, adding a guy like an Andrew Makuba fundamentally changed Texas. That was that cherry on top that made that secondary elite in 2024 that gave them a really good chance at slowing down that Ohio State offense. Now, you got the recipes in place. The process is proven. National championship.
Frankly, I think that recipe gets stronger and stronger as he's there longer. Because you even see how much he's ramping. They've always recruited well under him. They're recruiting as good as anyone in the country easily. Like,
and what they're doing. Sorry to interrupt. What they're doing is they're making sure they're recruiting the line of scrimmage out of high school, because that's that one place that it's hard to go address in the transfer portal. You look at the teams that try to address their offensive line in the portal, I'll show you an offensive line that stinks. There's a reason this Texas offensive line is, that they come out of high school together. They get developed in this program together. That's how you want to build line of scrimmage play. And, hey, we can go maybe grab a wide receiver if we need one. We can go grab a defensive back if we need one. But you don't want to be building your line of scrimmage play out of the transfer portal. Now, getting into this team in 2025, I think it fundamentally starts with to me, and I think a lot of Texas fans would probably agree with it, and it's an unknown right now, but I think a lot of people have this point of view, especially inside that Texas program. You're going to get an upgrade at quarterback play in 2025. And look, we had this conversation the other day. Quinn Ewers is not a bad college football quarterback. There's that narrative going around. That's just flat out wrong. Now, was he the player that the reason people are saying that's because the expectations for this kid coming out of high school were astronomically high.
And frankly, they should be when you're the quarterback in Texas. I know he was super
Agreed.
talented out of high school,
Yeah,
but
agreed.
every year Texas is going to have a quarterback who people are going to expect to play at a really high level,
Yeah.
especially given that they're in the Sarkisian offense that has done a really good job
Yeah.
making quarterbacks look really good.
Agreed. Now, what's the biggest upgrade from Quinn Ewers to Arch Manning? In my opinion, it's a little bit more of a playmaker at quarterback. I thought this was on full display in the first half against Ohio State. I mean, Quinn Ewers, when things break down, when things aren't perfect around him, when he doesn't have a great run game to work off, he's just not a quarterback that really elevates the offense. And you saw a lot of the explosive plays Texas has been able to hit all year, or just in that Ohio State game. It kind of came from Coach Sark getting creative with the scheme and kind of scheming it up for Quinn Ewers. He wasn't a quarterback that, if a play broke down, or I mean, the pocket awareness was just really bad all year, especially, well, not all year, but especially in that Ohio State game. But when things get ugly, that's not when Quinn Ewers thrives. If you want to be an elite quarterback, not only in college, but in the NFL, you have to be able to create. And I think Archman, and that's fundamentally what he brings to this Texas offense in 2025.
Yeah, and that was a huge thing because, again, when you play really good teams and especially really good defenses, you really
Yeah,
want your quarterback to, at a couple times a game, be able to make something really happen for you. That's a little bit unique. And again, he wasn't that type of guy. And you saw when they got rolling, they were able to be pretty effective. So there's like, again, he does take more criticism, frankly, from the national media than I think he deserves.
I
But
agree.
there is like levels to, okay, are you a really good quarterback? Are you kind of one of the great ones? And I do think that lack of athleticism and ability to be a playmaker, which
Yeah.
you saw a little bit better this year, frankly. You go to the Michigan game, he was able to do
Look,
some things, but
Dill,
you didn't see it consistently enough.
you get the version of Quinn Ewers, and we're Michigan fans, so we saw it firsthand. Like you get the version of Quinn Ewers that we saw week 2 against Michigan. I think Texas wins the national championship, and I think they beat Ohio State. It's just you didn't get that version consistently from Quinn Ewers during his time at Texas. And there's one thing we know about Arch Manning: significantly better athlete, significantly better creating when things aren't perfect. Another massive upgrade that I thought was at times a little bit of an Achilles heel was a difference maker at running back. And look, Wisner, Jaden Blue, they weren't bad, but you're probably not putting them top 10 running backs in the country. That's how we were talking about CJ Baxter before he goes down with the injury. If CJ Baxter makes a full recovery, if Jarrett Gibson takes the year 2 jump, those are the 2 running backs that I would expect to be leading this running back room going into 2025. And if you get that development from Jarrett Gibson and you get CJ Baxter back, but to what we know he is and what we saw from him as a true freshman, unquestionably the running back room, the running back play gets better in 2025.
And look, I would have thrown a 3 deep with Blue because I do think he's still going to have an
Agreed.
impact on
Yeah,
this team.
agreed.
I look at what they were able to do with him out of the backfield against Ohio State. Like, again, he's going to carve his role out, and I think
Agreed.
he played it well. But I think you are right. At the end of the day, when you want to be as physical as Texas runs it, like, again, that's like as much as you think Sarkisian, you kind of think West Coast air raid. These are physical Texas teams that is kind of becoming their identity, and they didn't exactly always feel like they had the running back. You said it to, I
The
mean, be
difference
that type
maker.
of team
Yeah,
that can
yeah.
run it 40
There were
times.
even runs in that Ohio State game where it's like, okay, solid 5-yard runner was blocked for 5. It didn't go for 15. We're not making the second level defender miss. Wide receiver position, Dill, I didn't even include Isaiah Bond. He's either going to the NFL or transferring, in my opinion. I don't think it's crazy to say the wide receiver room gets better too. Like if Matt Golden comes back for one more year, which I think is very reasonable that he does, and even if he doesn't, like Ryan Wingo year 2 jump, I think Ryan Wingo could have been more involved this year, quite frankly. DeAndre Moore emerged as a real difference maker. I would like to see Silas Bolden get on the field a little bit more. And then you have Khalil Lockett, who I know a lot of people like. Jamie French, to me, outside of DeCorian Moore, Jamie French was my second favorite wide receiver in the 2025 class. Elite route runner, knows how to create separation. I'm not going to go. In fact, no, I think I am. The pass catcher room might be better than it was in 2024 as well.
I think there was an element of a slight disappointment. They played fine at the receiver spot.
Oh, Isaiah Bond was a disappointment.
And that was the thing, because they kind of felt like they really wanted to build it around him. And once they kind of let Matt Golden take over and be the guy, I think you started to see it play a little bit better. But I think you're right. I think there was a bit of confusion as to who was that wide receiver one, who was the guy we need to feed. And once they kind of
Yeah.
settled on Matt Golden, I think it did take a step forward for sure. But I don't know that you got the premier playmaking that, especially you see the way they've recruited it. So these young guys coming up, I mean, there's a little bit different level of talent. And I don't think you're going to see Texas hit the portal for wide receivers like they did this year ever again under Sarkisian. I think maybe you'll add a guy here and there, like one or two a class, but you're never going to see them pretty much take a whole new group out of the portal. I mean, you look, they're recruiting a different level of wide receiver right now. And I think you should want that. Like, you want guys to be in the program longer and be like, you want Ryan Wingo to be the guy rather than Isaiah Bond, like kind of 1 year rental type guy.
Yeah, I'm with you. The only way that the pass catcher room gets worse is with the tight end spot. I mean, Gunnar Helm was awesome for Texas, and
that's the concern because Amari Niblack's not going to be the tight end for Texas primarily just because they want.
Okay, so what the thing is like is Michael Terry. Like what? So what position does he play when he gets to Texas? I mean, you probably could play 7 different positions if he wants to. I like him at tight end. I like him on offense just because he's such a difference maker. He's such a matchup nightmare. Now, is he ready as a freshman to take on the full tight end responsibilities? That's probably to be determined. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Texas maybe go out and get a maybe all around box checker tight end to kind of maybe be that role. But all eyes are on me are for Michael Terry because that kid I haven't seen many just better pure athletes coming out of high school than Michael Terry. Offensive line. I don't know if I go as far to say the offensive line is going to be better than it was in 2024 because you do lose the best tackle in the country in Calvin Banks. At least we're assuming he's going to the NFL. But Dill, there's going to be a lot of talk about it getting worse, way worse. I don't know if that's the case. And I think it hinges on Cam Williams. Like, what does Cam Williams decide to do? I personally, Dill, would really like to see him come back for 1 more year because I think there's another level. Like, I think he get picked in the NFL draft. There's no doubt about it. I think he go top 10. Like, that's how talented I think this kid is. Would love to see him get 1 more year. Trevor Gooseby, he came in and played some really good football at times for Texas. And then Brandon Baker's a guy that certainly could get on the football field as well. And then you look on the inside, DJ Campbell probably coming back. I don't know if it's going to be as good maybe early, especially because you're replacing some guys that have played a lot of football. I don't think it's going to be a bad unit in the slightest.
See, that's where I think people, when they look at Texas, I don't think they realize, like, yeah, they're not going to bring in guys on the offensive line, but people, like, are they forgetting that this position's been recruited really well,
very well,
developed really well? And, like, again, like, awesome. When Trevor Gooseby kind of comes in that game, you don't really see a huge dropout. And that's not a huge shot at Calvin Banks. That's just saying Trevor Gooseby came in and you weren't like, oh, they have a real problem on the left side of the offensive line. He comes in, it's really steady. Like a guy like Nato Yu, like, I mean, he's a guy who's been in this system now, really talented out of high school. Like, I don't know why people wouldn't think that these type of guys kind of step in and keep it rolling, because it's not like they're losing all these guys who are bums and that they're guys who were also bums. Like, they were all awesome.
They recruit the position really well, and they develop the position really well. And if you do that, you're going to have good offensive line every single year. And I believe it's Coach Flood down there. Coach Flood doing a freaking awesome job. Defensive line. Can they be as disruptive on the inside? You know, it definitely took a step down, and we knew it was from like Murphy to Devondre Sweat. Like, it's hard to see it like staying as good as it was in 2023. It was still very good with Alfred Collins. I thought Norton had a very, very good game against Ohio State. That's probably the question. Now you bring in Travis Shaw, who is a former 5-star at UNC. I think the question is, can we get him to play like a 5-star? You bring in Cole Brevard, who, again, Cole Brevard is not going to be the difference maker that Sweat was or Murphy was or Alfred Collins, but he's a damn good football player up there in the Big Ten the last couple of years at Purdue. The question for me is a little bit about the depth. It's a little bit about the top-end playmaking, but it's also about what does Justice Terry look like. Alex January played some good football too. I don't want to overlook him. But what does Justice Terry look like? And is he ready to come in year one and be not only just a depth piece, but a difference maker for Texas in 2025? That's probably where I'm looking at here.
But look, I mean, you brought more than just Justice Terry. You have a really amazing crop of young defensive tackles, Myron Charles in there too. Like, in these guys,
I don't think he's ready. Myron Charles is a little different for me. I think he needs a year personally.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll see though. Like, I would have thought January would have needed more
That's
time, and
true.
Colin
That's true.
Simmons would have needed more time because, like, even Colin Simmons came in kind of on the small side. You're like, oh, are they going to be able to get him up to like an SEC playing weight early where he can be dominant? He came in, played really dominant. Alex January kind of ditto, honestly. If they didn't have as deep of a unit with older guys, I think he would have played and played pretty well. So, this is where it gets interesting because again, you're going to lose a lot of guys. I think there was a level of, I don't think that's as talented of a Texas defensive line as Sarkisian would have wanted. And you saw how he had to hit the portal on the inside for guys who, again, I think simply didn't necessarily match the level of certain other position groups for this Texas team.
Ooh,
Again, you
yeah.
look at the way he's recruiting, like Justice Terry's going to be a better player than Bill Norton or Jermaine Lele. I think
Yeah,
that's
well, now but now the question is like, is he going to be better than them day one?
And that will be the question again. Like you're seeing younger guys out of high school. We've been talking about it play better, not always at the defensive line spot. That's a position that does feel like lends itself a little more to veteran. But again, they have some older guys who are going to play well. I think as much as you want to talk about Justice Terry, Alex January is the guy I'm looking at because he's a guy who showed some talent that would be really interesting if he can put really good film on for Texas because he looked really good as a young player and he looked a little overmatched physically. Like
Oh
didn't look
yeah,
like he was
that
bad,
was
but
arguably the biggest surprise for me. Is like when we covered Alex January coming out, it's like definitely didn't think he'd be playing as much as he did year one. And so like, what it look like? You're fired up. Very similar though. It's hard to see the edge room not just being dominant. And you lose a really good football player in Barron Sorrell. Never got enough credit for how good he was at Texas. Ethan Burke in the pipeline. Colin Simmons is a guy that was elite this year. And again, you said it, like as he continues to become the physical freak that he is going into year two, might just damn well be the best edge rusher in the country next year. Trey Moore, what does he decide to do? We'll kind of see. Lance Jackson coming in as a freshman, that dude's ready to come in early and play. The defensive line is still going to be a very, very solid unit. I think your question mark is what's the inside look like? Backers, Anthony Hill Jr., we know about him. Brad Spence, I think, is a massive pickup. Like nobody talked about it because hey, Texas was still in the playoffs, and so you weren't really talking too much Texas in the portal. Brad Spence was my guy at Arkansas. I think he's a difference maker at linebacker, especially as he's playing behind a better defensive line. Because if he's a linebacker that you can keep clean and let him just go fly around and make plays, really good football player. I know they like Ty Anthony Smith a lot. I look at that front seven and say you feel good about it. What's your take about Texas going into the back end of the secondary? Because that's where, okay, you lose Andrew Makuba, who is really good. You lose Jahdae Barron, who was very, very good for Texas. How do you see that position group shaking out for Texas in 2025?
I mean it's so talented. And again, you're still keeping a fair amount of guys who played a lot. Like Malik Muhammad played a ton, Jalen Gilbo played a ton. Jelani McDonald really started, especially towards the end of the year, playing a lot. And then obviously Michael Taft. So I don't look, yeah, you're going to lose guys. Good teams are always going to lose a couple of guys. I
Yeah.
don't see a reason that this unit should take a huge step back, if any, especially given it's one of the position groups that in like 23 and 24, they recruited exceptionally well. So I'll be really interested to see again like when you have that much talent, I guess, and they're not losing a ton of guys to the portal. Another thing that I think is one of those things, if you're looking at where Texas is at, you love seeing that. Like your good players don't hit the portal. Their good secondary players haven't been hitting the portal. This should be a good unit. And again, like this is very speculative right now because we haven't seen guys like
Yeah.
Kobe Black and some of these cornerbacks.
And also, you don't know who. I want to make it clear. Like, I'm not sure what Michael Taft decides to do or Jalen Gilbo. I'm assuming. I think there's a good chance, and I think you made a really good point that it's not fun to talk about, but player retention and like going out of your way to entice your best football players, not only to not have the transfer portal, but maybe come back for one more year. I'll just say this: like to me, it feels like that Michigan where it's like you knew you were so close as Michigan fans, 2022, close to winning it all, not quite there. You got the feel for it. You know you have the roster to do it in 2025. Does that play a role in some of these guys saying, "All right, I'm gonna stay one more year in Austin, Texas. Let's go get this thing done in 2025"? I think that's certainly a possibility too. But as you go through the depth chart, Dell, and then you look at, and this is also an important conversation too. Then you look at the rest of the landscape and say, all right, well, Ohio State. I'm not saying Ohio State's going to be bad next year, but they are going to lose a ton. They might break a record in terms of NFL draft picks this year. They're going to lose a lot of guys. And then you look at Georgia and say we got question marks about what they're doing at quarterback. Same thing for Alabama. Is Texas your preseason number one team in the country? I think it's a question you got to start asking. And I think haven't done my full prep on it, but I might answer that yes. We'll see. Well, I'll probably do a top 25 at some point this week, maybe after the national championship. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.